All right, welcome everyone to the 2024 January edition of the Collaboration Cafe webinar series. This is sponsored by the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub with support from the National Science Foundation. I'm John MacMullen, Executive Director of the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub, and today we'll be exploring a newer program from NSF that is focused on building capacity for research administration and ultimately more research at institutions where that infrastructure is currently very limited. To help us understand the goals that NSF has for this program, I'm very happy to welcome a program director with responsibility for the granted program. That's Dr. Kimberly Littlefield. She is in the Office of Integrative Activities. Thank you so much for being here today, Kimberly.
So glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, John.
Absolutely. I'll note that the slides for today's session will be available on our website shortly after the webinar. You can get to my slides there right now, but we'll be adding the slides from NSF later when we have those as well. And we do record these sessions, and so you're able to see that after today and share that with colleagues as well. Since we do have quite a few folks on the call who are new to this series, I'll just quickly mention who we are and what we do. So we are part of a national network of 4 data innovation hubs focused on data science and building collaborations and new communities in that space. So this has been around and funded by NSF for several years now. We work individually within our geographic regions, but we collaborate nationally as well. And so if you're watching this from outside the 12-state Midwest area, I encourage you to reach out to the hub that is in your geographic region and get involved in the work that they do. They'd be happy to hear from you. So I'm going to stop sharing here and turn it over to Dr. Littlefield to get us started with the background of the new granted program and what you're all trying to do there.
Okay. Can everybody see my title slide? Does it come up?
It came up and went away.
No kidding. Okay, how's that? Better?
There you go. That's good.
Okay, good. All right, let me get set up a little bit here so that I can see what's coming next. So greetings all. Good afternoon. Thanks for spending some time with us. I love this idea of the Collaborations Cafe. So John, thanks to you and the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub for this opportunity to champion Granted. I'm hoping that folks have heard of Granted before, but if you haven't, I will indoctrinate you into the knowledge of this new, wholly unique program at NSF. So Granted is, in the spirit of great NSF acronyms. Granted stands for Growing Research Access for Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. I'll unpack that a little bit as we go on. I send greetings from my partner in crime, Dina Myers-Stroud, who we're a small program director team for Granted. She wasn't able to make it today, but so you got me. And hopefully that'll work. But yeah, so we're a small team doing big things to support your bold, ambitious ideas about how to grow research capacity and capability, specifically, in the research support and service infrastructure part of the research enterprise. So John asked me to give a brief program overview, which I will. We can talk about gaps and challenges, which we know about. I'm anxious to hear what you folks have to say about that. I'm also interested to hear about successes and best practices that you all are practicing to grow access to research support service infrastructure. we talk a lot in deficit language, but Granted is also interested in scaling up, transferring successful best practices to grow research access. So everything's on the table. And then, would love to just be part of the discussion and learn more from you all. Okay, so let me introduce the lens by which Granted thinks about the research enterprise. So I think most folks are aware of these two major parts of the research enterprise, these two ecosystems, the facilities, equipment, resources, inherent in the institutions and organizations. And then, of course, the investigators, teams, and trainees, which really make up the disciplinary knowledge, disciplinary networks, disciplinary expertise, research and discovery expertise. It's really this ecosystem where our faculty experts, our discovery, technology, and innovation pipelines reside. The thing about Granted is that we postulate that a strong national research enterprise relies on more than funding for the research itself. And that's a direct quote from our active program description funding opportunity, which I'll tell you a little about in a minute. So there's a third leg to this. There's a third part of the research enterprise, a third ecosystem that the Granted initiative is focusing on. And that's the human capital, the practices and policies and partnerships that make up the foundational research and research support and service infrastructure part of the research enterprise. I liken it to the ice, many layers thick, many sectors thick, that we smooth out as best as we can so that our faculty, our discovery, our innovation experts can skate cleanly, freely, wide open for their research. And so if you're a research administrator, career research administrator like I am, I'm certain that you know exactly what ecosystem I'm talking about. The many sectors, the many layers include research administration, pre and post award, research development. Some institutions have it, some don't. Tech transfer, industry, and public-private partnerships. I'm just reading, all of the sectors on the Granted wheel. Research compliance and all of the many layers of research compliance inherent in that sector. The student research training infrastructure. How do you get undergraduates into research if you don't have an undergraduate research training program? Maybe you want to bring more graduate research fellowships to campus, and you need specialized administrative infrastructure to administer those types of awards. So student research training infrastructure is part of the Granted wheel. Research policy. You don't have policy, you don't have practices, you likely don't have a very functional research enterprise. Finally, research leadership. We want to build sustainable strategic vision in our research leaders. We want to build succession plans so that we can transfer knowledge from one leader to the next. These are all some of the things that the Granted initiative wants to support. So in this next slide, I'm going to show you just a schematic view comparing all of the different research enterprise functions that I just talked about. And I'm going to do it between well-resourced R1 or R2, comprehensive R1 or R2 universities, which, as you all know, if that's a chair that you're sitting in an institution like that, we have multiple people in these different sectors, multiple ways to access talent and expertise, that faculty have multiple ways to access this talent and expertise. Contrast that with primarily undergraduate institutions, some, and I would argue even most, emerging research institutions, where there's one person who wears many hats and who is likely operating across all of these different sectors. When you have this type of disparity, when faculty can't access research support and service infrastructure, it makes it very difficult to participate in the national research enterprise. So that's the dot that connects building capacity in this ecosystem, this part of the enterprise, with broadening and diversifying faculty participation in the national research enterprise. So hopefully, you get how those dots connect. We are targeting this part of the enterprise to help to assist faculty, students, trainees to really be part of the national research enterprise. So why granted? A couple of reasons. One, we have to start thinking differently about how to increase participation, right? NSF proposal submissions, and you can check this out yourself by going to NSF by the numbers. So NSF proposal submissions have been declining over the past 10 years, virtually in every institution. We could check out the institutions that participate in the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub. At the same time, the R&D budget for NSF has been increasing. And, if you just, think about that intuitively, you're like, oh, wow, okay, that's okay. Fewer proposals, more money. That means that we'll have a higher success rate. And the thing about that is that NSF wants to fund excellence in research, excellent ideas, excellent discovery, excellent advances to the fields, including the field of research administration. And so that's why Granted was created, right? We have to be able to facilitate more proposal submissions to NSF, because if we don't, you can say, oh, that's great, we might see a higher funding rate, but Congress is going to have the final say in the budget. And Congress looks at the number of proposals that NSF receives. And if the number of proposals keeps going down, Congress is going to say, NSF, you don't need that research and development budget. And so they're going to start cutting the budget. And then that's the situation that we don't want to be in. So we'd really like to see more proposal submissions, right? And to do that, faculty need access to research support and service infrastructure. So we had a little boost with the CHIPS and Science legislation. It defined a term, emerging research institutions. That gave us sort of a target when we can talk about these institutions that expend less than $50 million in research expenditures in any year. That's what defines an emerging research institution. And we could say, we really want to take a look at those institutions because, certainly there are outliers, but for the most part, it's the emerging research institutions, or the ERIs, that have a lot of these folks that wear multiple hats. Right? I mean, maybe it's one or two folks, but they're still wearing multiple hats. And the faculty and discovery voices are still not able to get access to the national research enterprise when there is not enough support to do so. So that gave us a really good target. Now we can say, ERIs, we're really encouraging you to think about how you can grow your capacity and your capability to support faculty research endeavors. So, we also thought about, gosh, we got to do something new, right? NSF is used to funding the institutions and organizations, providing resources for major research instrumentation. They know the research and discovery and innovation pipeline very well. But, this third leg of the stool, the research support and service infrastructure, that whole ecosystem stands behind the scenes, right? It's really an invisible critical part of the research enterprise. And so through this support, we want to bring awareness and knowledge of research enterprise staff and functions. And I'm pleased to say, I think we're doing that. The other thing to just ponder on is that in fiscal year 22, the 22 herd survey data just came out. About $100 billion was expended by college and universities. And so if your university doesn't have research support to submit competitive proposals, you're going to be shut out of that of those competitions to be part of this $100 billion awarding mechanism. And on the flip side, if your university doesn't have post-award support or project management support, you're going to be shut out again from being able to manage awards that come in from this $100 billion enterprise. It's actually more than $100 billion. That's just the expenditures. So we really need access to a knowledgeable and intentional workforce. And that's what Granted is also intended to do. And then, of course, the pandemic showed us that, work is just not what it used to be, right? There are a lot of dynamic forces going on, lots of dynamics in the research enterprise workforce, teleworking, remote opportunities, hybrid. How does that impact the efficiency and the effectiveness of the sectors? How does that impact research participation overall in an institution? How do we make this a very balanced, supported research enterprise for all who participate in it? So John asked me to talk just briefly about the granted funding opportunities. So we have a big program description funding opportunity out right now. It's a big umbrella opportunity. It's pretty much large enough to drive a truck through. We're accepting regular research proposals or proposals that follow the research format. We're accepting planning proposals, and we're accepting conference proposals through this funding opportunity. Later last year, we released a Dear Colleague letter that encouraged folks to focus on building capacity in the post-award sector. And that was because we didn't get a lot of proposals about building capacity or, innovative, ambitious ideas about how to grow that part of the enterprise, which is really, I think, for a lot of people, a really major pain point. So that DCL had a target date on it, January 9th, but it's still open. The funding opportunity, the funding program description funding opportunity is still open. No deadlines, no minimums, no maximums. I'm going to skip ahead here. No minimums, no maximums in the budget. We're looking really for bold, ambitious ideas to build capacity. We want to learn something from every project that Granted funds. We want every project to be a model for building capacity, not only at the institution that receives the award, but at other institutions like it. Or, if it's coming from a large institution like UIUC, how do we scale the success of a project at UIUC to other ERI partners or across to other R1 partners? We're looking for projects that are fully developed. I mean, these are full proposals, 15-page proposals, well justified, good rationale, literature search, although I'll admit there's a paucity of literature about the research enterprise, but there's more coming, and with the granted projects and the conferences that have been funded, there will be even more literature for folks to cite. We are encouraging people who eat, sleep, and breathe the research enterprise, the staff, to be PIs and co-PIs on these proposals. You know what your institutions need to support faculty becoming part of research activities. And then finally, ask for what you need. We don't want anyone to feel like they're holding back on a budget request because, they want to hire 6 people, and boy, that's expensive. Yes, it is expensive, but think about the return on investment for capacity building like that. And then finally, just, when Congress is able to, we're hoping for our full appropriation of $45 million for fiscal year 24. But right now we're still in a CR, and, we'll hope that comes along soon. I know I'm running long, John, so I'm just going to go quickly here. What it's not. So it's important to know what the granted program description funding opportunity is not. So again, it's not a limited submission, no deadline, no floor, no cap on the budget. It doesn't restrict or discourage any type of higher education institution. Nonprofits are eligible. The general NSF eligibility guidelines apply. We recommend that you plan a project no more than 5 years, right? It's difficult to fund anything for more than 5 years at NSF. And then finally, and this is a big thing, Granted does not fund disciplinary research. So there are other directorates at NSF that fund disciplinary research, and that goes for faculty research, student research, postdoc research. Granted is focused on building institutional capacity. And the reason why we don't fund disciplinary research is because that benefits an individual. Certainly it would trickle up to the institution, but we also don't fund credentialing for research administration staff as an individual benefit. Granted will support training for all parts of the enterprise, but what we want to do is make sure that training knowledge, if you get it from an outside third party like Encora or SRAI, that training knowledge, when it's over, when it's done, resides at the institution. So to train the trainer model, essentially. Feel free to bring in expertise, but transfer that expertise effectively so that people have access to it after that third party leaves. Okay, what we're going to talk about, we know there are challenges in the research administration, and they're not limited to just ERIs and MSIs. We know large institutions also have gaps, also have challenges, right? We know there is disparate access to assistance and support for research and sponsored activity. I mean, even within large institutions, some departments have access, some don't. We know that hiring and attrition lead to constant churn of staff. How do we tackle that? We know, again, there are dynamic work environments. We know that training is available, but it's not equitably accessible. So there's wide disparity in experience and capability across the enterprise. We know that there are systemic issues. This part of the enterprise, this ecosystem, does not have great career ladder structures. We don't have standardized position titles, compensation ladders, and we often lack within our institutions policy and processes to guide the management of external funding. We know there are faculty workload challenges, right? How can we, through this mechanism, help faculty reduce the administrative burden so that their workload, they can balance their workload and their research and discovery passions. And then finally, institutional research missions. We want to stress that, and if you want to grow your research institution from a master's program to an R1, you've got to right size and invest in research support and service infrastructure. So we're seeing, folks looking for how to advance in their institutional status, and really considering how the investment in this part of the enterprise is critical and necessary. So with that, let's talk. Let's John, I know you're going to sort of facilitate the discussion. I'm interested in hearing what your gaps and challenges are. I'm also interested in hearing what your successes and best practices are. I'd like to know if folks have thought about submitting a granted proposal, and if you have, great. If you haven't, and why not? What are the barriers to submitting a proposal? And then I'm, of course, happy to answer any other questions. And then at the end, I'll put up contact info and some granted resources. So with that, let's talk.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that overview and a lot of detail that we don't get from just the program description. It's
Sure.
very helpful to get that level of detail.
Good.
I'm going
Good.
to go back to my slides just for a couple of minutes here. I'm going to skip my overview slides because you did a great job talking through that with us. Before we get into the discussion, I want to, in case folks have to hop off here, I want to mention that we have sessions coming up in February and March that are looking at other NSF programs. In February, we'll look at the Human Networks and Data Science program, and in March, the Early Career program for faculty called Career. And so come back or let your colleagues know about these if you're interested in those. Kim, I wanted to ask you about the conferences that Granted has supported so far. There's quite a few of those coming up in 2024. Can you say anything about the participation of those? Are they primarily open to folks within the community? Are these opportunities that people can take advantage of?
Yes, they absolutely can, John. And thank you for showcasing those conferences, at Maryland and South Dakota. So yes, I think in general, I can think of maybe one or two that are invite only, or you have to be registered for a professional society meeting because it's taking part, the conference is adjacent to the professional society meeting, but otherwise the entirety of the community is welcome. Some have planned in-person conferences. So I think, in that case, participation is probably limited, but most have virtual options. And I would encourage you all, there's a whole part of the Granted website, the convenings part of the Granted website, that talks about each of the 25 projects, over 29 awards, and gives much greater detail about when the conference or convening is going to be, who the point of contact is, whether it has a virtual option, whether it's only in person. And so we update that as soon as we get information from each of the project directors. And so, that's real time updated now. You can see the scope of the Granted conferences. We have very few gaps across the U.S., very few states that aren't involved. So, but yes, I mean, if you see something on the East Coast and you're sitting in Iowa and you want to attend, definitely reach out.
Great, and that's really helpful to know, because a lot of the times the people who would most benefit from these meetings are really not able to travel for various reasons. It could be funding, it could be workload, it could be a combination. So having some virtual attendance opportunities, I think, is really valuable for people.
I'll just mention this other thing too. Many of the conferences that are offering in-person and virtual options are offering stipend offsets for people who are traveling. And they're not covering the entire cost of it, but they are, through NSF support of the conference, offsetting some of the costs for participants to come in person. So again, that's sort of each conference is managing that on their own. So I encourage you, if you want to go in person, to see if that type of compensation is available.
Very good. So let's get into discussion here in a moment. If you have questions for our guest, or if you want to start the discussion based upon the questions that we've put up so far, feel free to put those in the chat or get ready to unmute in a minute here. But I wanted to mention that prior to this webinar, we had put out a brief poll about needs assessment in the research administration space. And I want to thank the folks who completed that. If you are interested in participating in that poll, it is still open now. I'm going to put the link into the chat right now. You're welcome to add your voice to that and share that with colleagues as well. But we asked basically two high-level questions in the poll. One was, what are the critical gaps that your institution is facing in the research administration space? And we included a number of options here, as well as an open choice for folks to add their own items. And so we had a pretty small response so far, but pretty clear that staff support is high on the list, along with other staff-related issues, but also, some of the issues that Kim talked about in terms of, is your institution ready to receive federal funding? That can be a big barrier if you're not even set up in the systems to receive or even submit proposals. So those kinds of systems readiness or facilities readiness issues can be challenges as well. Beyond critical gaps, we asked about what the priorities are that you're most focused on right now in building out that capacity at your institution. And so, again, quite a mix here, ranging from very early stage activities like proposal development and research development, pre and post award activities, but really that range from the granted wheel that Kim presented in terms of research integrity or regulatory compliance, some of the other technology commercialization dimensions. So pretty good range of topics, and we're hoping to get more input of what some of those issues are that you all are facing. We asked this of a broad group of people, and I'm happy that we had some response from non-R1 institutions who was really the target for today's session. And so again, I encourage you to share this with folks in your network who may be at those institutions. And we asked what kind of roles people have and how long they have been in those. And so again, interesting mix of leadership level as well as people doing the day-to-day work of proposal processing and administration. So really appreciate that input from folks. And I'd like to shift now to our discussion portion of the session. We have 25 minutes left, and so let's use that time and learn what challenges you all on the call are facing. And I like the positioning that you had, Kim, of we want to hear some of those pain points, but we also want to hear what those successes have looked like. How have you grown that capacity over time? What did you do? What could people learn from who are in a similar kind of situation? And so let's hear what you all are thinking at this point. Who would like to get us going? I will say, if you would like to ask a question but would prefer to be anonymous, you can do that in the Q&A function, or you can send that as a direct message to me and I will ask the question on your behalf. But it looks like we have a question in the chat now. Looks like more of a comment, but thank you for that. That's really helpful to know those details.
Hi, Kim. We've talked before. I'm looking at a different version of Granted, and the biggest problem I have with getting with applying for a Granted grant is that I don't have a sponsored research office. Like, it's like zero, non-existent, right? And it sounds like there's funding built in that if you built to like create a sponsored research office within this, right? But my understanding is it would need to have a broader impact as well. Like, you're not just going to come in and like stand up the sponsored research office. We would need to include like training, like teaching other schools how to set it up, or maybe like creating a knowledge base that could be shared. Is that more of like, I know I'm asking a very specific question, but I'm trying to Yeah.
No, Nathan, no, I'm glad. I want to dispel any myths or misunderstandings and I'm not saying that
Yeah.
that's where you're headed, but we're looking for projects that are that uniquely address the challenges and gaps at an institution. If you guys need a sponsored projects office, sponsored programs office, then tell us why and tell us what the outcomes are that you expect to result from building a sponsored projects office. You don't have to do anything more than that. You don't have to have any other bells and whistles. We know that universities with sponsored projects offices, right, submit more proposals. We don't know about competitiveness, but certainly if you have the mechanism to submit, right, you could submit more proposals. On the companion flip side of that, folks who start pre-award offices and then realize all these great benefits of pre-award success, if they don't have post-award to manage those awards that come in, that's I mean, some people say, oh, that's a great problem to have, but that's a risky problem to have, is to not have post-award. So I think if folks really need capacity, think about balancing both sides of that coin. You don't have to think about training just yet. Add layers on as you establish your core research support and service infrastructure. Come back to granted and add layers on. Now we have capacity to be able to submit and manage. Here's how we want to even expand our institutional participation in research. Does that help?
Helps a lot.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not saying it isn't a heavy lift to put this proposal together, but you don't have to make it anything more than what is going to benefit your institution and frame it as a model that would benefit any other institution that looks like yours.
Very good. I see a question about whether this recording will be available, and yes, it will. So it'll be available on our website, hopefully later today, maybe tomorrow, but I'll put the link again in there to that site where you can find that. Kim, coming back to one of the things that Nathan asked a moment ago about collaborations, if I remember correctly from seeing the first round awards that you all made, there are a few cases where institutions got together to collaborate on a project to make that more institution independent to some extent. And so anticipating what you were saying about, how do you share this with other institutions? They were trying to do that right up front in different ways. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little about how Granted sees the difference between a proposal that's focused on one institution versus maybe a partnership between a couple institutions in a particular region or of a particular type where they would benefit from each other in that experience.
So thanks for that question, John. So one of the granted themes that we'd like, there are 3 themes that we ask folks to articulate where their project, where their proposal is really focused on. And one of those is growing partnerships, not only across collaborating institutions of higher education, but also across professional societies, any sort of knowledge or data resource that houses information about the research enterprise. In terms of looking at a proposal that is maybe that benefits a single institution versus one that has many collaborations, we don't have that lens. We're looking for projects that, if they benefit a single institution, have a vision for how the model can be translated to other similar institutions who may need the same capacity or capability, the same type of model. We're also looking for how to scale up, or in some cases, scale across that model to other institutions. Our reviewers come from the research administration community. So making a case for a multi-institution type of project, you gotta remember who's reviewing these projects, right? They're people who know what it takes to set up subawards at an ERI or at a PUI. There are folks that know that someone who's wearing a single hat, working across all the sectors, do they really have effort to commit, right? So folks know, our reviewers know what it takes to implement the projects that are coming through. And so if you are going to propose a multi-institution collaborative proposal, or even, collaborative is sort of a loaded word in NSF, but if you're going to propose a multi-institution type of project and you want to propose something where you're right sizing the capacity and capability building to the specific institutions within the participating sort of consortium or collaborative, that's absolutely a great thing to do, because every institution is going to be different in what they need. I think where it gets a little dicey is coming back to say, what does success look like across a project like that? Certainly the institutions will have their individual measures and metrics because they're going to all build capacity in different ways, but you're going to want to harmonize some aspect of that project, of that model, so that someone could lift that model out and put it into use in another similar collaborative setting. So all that's to say is that we look at the projects, we look at the project design, we look at the benefit to the institution, and the only broader impact is broadening and diversifying research participation at the institution, and then a vision for doing it nationally, by use of the model that's created in the project. So yes, Granted wants to build partnerships. We know that's difficult. And where that can be done, we encourage it. But there's no preference for, sort of a partnership versus a project that would benefit an institution that could be run or translated.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And so, if I'm thinking about this as a proposer, maybe if I'm doing it as a single institution, I'm thinking about my data management plan, or I'm thinking about my outputs and how I might take what I learn along the way and what I produce, and think about how those could be shared within my institution, like you said, and then maybe what audiences might benefit most from that information when I create it. So thinking about what's the plan to share that beyond the end of the award, and who would benefit. That might be something that you would talk about in your proposal.
Absolutely. The dissemination plan, critical component. Just like you said, if the project is going to benefit, acutely a single institution, how are you going to get the word out about the success that you've had broadly enough so that you can catalyze the use of the model and, start this chain reaction of national transformation based on the use of the model? So dissemination plan, critical. There are lots of ways to disseminate information. The Collaboration Cafe is one of them, right? Professional meetings, professional societies, presentations, publications, even in our field, folks publish about research enterprise capacity and capability building. The other critical components, and John, you know this well because we've talked about it, an evaluation plan. So, you got to tell us what success looks like, how you're going to measure it, what outcomes you're looking for in the short, medium, and long term. And the other critical component is a sustainability plan. So NSF, Granted, is willing to invest in what institutions need to right-size their research support and service infrastructure capacity. We want to understand how that investment is going to be sustained when grant award funding sunsets. And so that's a big component. And you all know it. That means talking up front about wow, if we see what we think we're going to see on this return on the NSF investment, how are we going to keep this going? How are we going to expand it? How are we going to leverage it into other things? So yes, dissemination, evaluation, sustainability, as well as a strong rationale and project design. That's what we're looking for.
Very good. Other questions that folks have, we still have plenty of time here, so feel free to put those in the chat or unmute. I'm thinking about some other conversations that we've had with folks at PUIs and TCUs, for example, about building capacity, but I'll come back to that. I saw Nathan, you turned your video on. Go right ahead if you have another question.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you both also for hosting this, and again, Kim, for talking to us.
Absolutely.
You were talking about partnerships specifically, and I have a lot of developed partnerships at my school, but I cannot like access those for like grant writing purposes, right? Like it's not possible. Like I have relationships through, I have an LSAMP grant right now that I run. So we have connections to lots of places, but the next step would be like developing that partnership in a way that like focuses on writing grants together, or like not necessarily my LSAMP partners, but even more explanation wise, I'm in the Chicago area. So like I work at a PUI, that's a small liberal arts institution, but there's multiple national labs within half an hour drive. There's multiple like R1 institutions. And so like would part of the partnership building be talking about how that office, or how like what we're getting from granted helps us like capitalize on those, and then talk about an evaluation of like developing grants with those? Or is the partnerships more you're talking about like how we're creating like a network of the people who are working on like the research infrastructure?
So I think it can be either, and I know that's not very satisfying, but what I hear you talking about, Nathan, is and I don't know your institution, but I'm a research development professional sort of by career trajectory. And RD professionals really thrive when there is a collaborative environment to operate in, to build collaborations, build an understanding of research expertise in a region or a community, and start leveraging that knowledge to increase research proposal development and research activity. So I immediately went to, wow, maybe your institution could use some research development professional capacity, right? To do that. In terms of building a broader network, so Granted also participates in the Research Coordination Network solicitation, and that's NSF 23529. And I'd be happy if folks are interested in how to frame a granted RCN to talk with folks about that, because that's about specifically network building in the research administration, or the research the granted ecosystem, the research support and service ecosystem. And that can be very exciting. And there's support to do that. We haven't had a granted RCN come in. We've had lots of folks think about it. And I always tell folks, well, look at what's been funded. It looks very discipline oriented, because it is. They talk about building research networks, coordinating research networks, but you can also build research administration networks under that solicitation, where you're looking at some of the metrics of what does a successful network look like, to your point, Nathan. Oh, thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so I put the link to that RCN program in the chat for folks who may be interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess coming back to my question I was about to ask, there are institutions that there are faculty doing research. They're trying to carve out time from their teaching to do that, and maybe getting their first grant to support that. But their institution just really doesn't have the infrastructure that they need to even receive a federal award. And so I'm wondering how early stage granted reaches back into that scenario. Can they hire consultants to help them understand what specifically they need to get to have a basic pre and post award kind of infrastructure to develop their SAM application, just to even be able to submit an award? How early can they go back in that process?
That's a great question, John. So we're learning a couple things now as we're getting some time underneath our belt. So, early stage, like what you're talking about, I would recommend that folks think about a planning proposal and think about utilizing some of the support through planning activities to bring in a consultant to say, where do we even start with this? Because the data and the information that you'll create, number one, that's intellectual merit, right? You're creating a profile of an institution that looks like this, with needs of this, and this, assets of this, and this, in order to support a goal of broadening and diversifying research. And so, yes, you can bring in, and Cora has a consulting service, Huron has a consulting service, through a planning proposal to do just that. Then the idea is to take that information and think and design a project to build capacity in the areas that have just been identified, through that consulting activity. So build your proposal around known ideas. Now, some folks, say, oh, we're going to do a project in multiple stages, multiple phases. We're going to do this needs assessment in phase 1 of our bigger project. But, if you think about it, if you do that during the planning phase or a planning proposal, planning award, then you've got a full 5 years of a granted full proposal that you can implement a really well-designed capacity building project that speaks to the data you just collected in your planning activities. So we can start at ground zero, as long as people, have a vision and have an idea of where they want to go and how they want to get there. We can start anywhere.
That's great to know. And I really like the planning grant stage, because like you said, that means you end up with the full 5 years potentially, rather than spending a year on the needs assessment and you don't have as much time left to implement. I see a question in the chat from Armgard about, what if you really don't have a sponsored projects office at your institution, and maybe you're not fortunate like Nathan is to have potential collaborators nearby where you could be a co-PI or a sub-awardee on another project. Are there options or mechanisms for investigators to get around that limitation?
Well, with granted support, not many. I mean, the idea is to build institutional capacity. And so if you want to build infrastructure to be able to submit proposals and participate in the National Research Enterprise, you're going to have to bite the bullet and write a proposal to do it. So granted, unfortunately, will not fund consultants to which there are plenty of consulting firms that will help institutions who are suffering from staff leaving and so forth. I'm thinking of Attain or Huron, right, that you can hire to outsource research administration. But Granted won't support that type of activity. Granted is really about building capacity in-house. And so, we've seen folks propose shared services across institutions. So maybe you have a UIUC collaborator that could help. The sponsored programs office could help submit proposals on behalf of another institution. That takes some working out of things, but you got to start someplace. And I think that for a model for building something from scratch, we're looking for bold, ambitious ideas.
Very good. We just have a minute or two left here. Any final questions for our guest before we wrap up today?
John, can I put up my slide for my last slide
Yes,
for contact
absolutely.
information for folks? Okay.
Yep.
Let me share that because there are a couple of things I want to bring people's attention to. One, you can get us an email. You can go to the granted@nsf.gov email. You can send email directly to Alicia, Dina, or I. That's the website link. Lots of resource there. I encourage you through the website to join the Granted mailing list. Occasionally, we'll put information out. We've been sending conference information when we get an update about, there's a conference that's going to be this time, so forth. That goes out through the Granted mailing list. Like I said, our reviewers are from our community. So if you are interested in reviewing for Granted, please volunteer to be a reviewer. You can fill out the little volunteer survey form, attach your CV to the survey, and you can find that link again on the website. If you're interested about any type of Granted proposal, come see us every Wednesday from 3 to 4 Eastern time. You can find the Zoom access link to our Granted office hour. We have from 2 to 50 people join us every week to talk about Granted. We usually can accommodate 2 breakout sessions. Again, it's first come, first serve to get into a breakout session with Granted team member to talk confidentially about a project idea. You can also send a project summary through to us at granted@nsf.gov. Short summary. Tell us what you want to do, how you're going to do it, what the intellectual merit and broader impacts are of your project idea. We'll review it. We'll let you know if it's Granted aligned, if it needs some tweaking, or we can offer some competitive insight. We'll set a meeting with you. So lots of ways to get more information and really, think about how to hone a competitive project idea. Just want to point out too that if you think you'd like my job, we still have Granted IPA opportunities open. So we're looking, again, like any Office of Research should do, to build a strong succession plan of Granted team members. So if you're interested in an IPA, which is a rotational program director role, like what I'm in, because I'm on loan from my university, working for NSF for Granted, please, again, that information is on the website. So John, I just can't thank you enough. And I can't thank, everyone who took their hour out to come hear about Granted. Be happy to talk with folks, like I said, at office hours or through email. Please reach out.
Yeah, and we really appreciate you taking the time. For those who haven't contacted an NSF program director before, it certainly can be intimidating, but that is part of their role. And I think, Kim, you have demonstrated that the Granted team is more than happy to meet with people, and you've got regular office hours. You've got a lot of resources on the website. So we really appreciate the transparency and the openness that you all have to meet with people.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to be the most accessible initiative at NSF. That's one of our goals, one of our metrics. So
great. Thanks again for being here. Thanks to our audience. We would love to have you come back for another session in the future. And thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Yep. Thank you, John. Thank you all. Hope to see you soon.